Hi everyone, it's Lindsay, and I want to share how I made my Bible marker with you today. Now, this is pretty much a bookmark, so you could take the same concept and use it as a bookmark in just a normal book. However, I wanted to go ahead and make a Bible marker for my actual Bible journaling. Now, I am using this Prayer Warrior stamp set from Joy Claire Stamps. This is from their Color by Faith line. And it has some really great images in it that not only go along with Bible journaling, but also with any card you might want to make or a bookmark if you wanted to make it as well. Now for this, I'm going to go ahead and use the little girl image that is in there, and I've die cut a rectangle from some watercolor paper, and this is a stitched rectangle die that I've used just to add a little bit more interest. So I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink to stamp this down. I have treated this rectangle with my embossing bag because I'm going to do some embossing on this image. So that's just going to help me out with stray powders and just making it a really nice clean embossed image. So I'm going to stamp this a couple times, which is why I'm using my Misty to get it nice and dark. Then I sprinkled on some clear embossing powder, and then I'll just heat set that right onto the image. I don't know about you, but I love heat embossing. It always still amazes me as much from the first time to now, just how it melts and how it becomes raised. And it's one of my favorite techniques of all time, I think. So I'll just go ahead and heat set that, and then once I had it done, I did a little bit of watercoloring on this little girl image. So I'm using different distress inks and also distress markers. You can see here I used antique linen on her face. I'll pull in some vintage photo from the marker and just color that in on the darker spots of her hair, and then just blend that out with some water. Now I am using the colors from this month's challenge to really go along with this image. So on the feathers on the top of her head, I'm using some abandoned coral, dusty concord, and cracked pistachio for those feathers. I cut out a mask from Ink-a-Dink-a-Doo masking paper. Went ahead and masked off my watercolor image. I made sure the watercolor was completely dry before I put down that mask. I used my heat tool. And now I'm coming in with some hickory smoke distress ink, and I am going to ink up the area around this image that I stamped and watercolored. Now I'm not using a very heavy hand here. I'm going pretty soft on the color, and I just want to really fade this off into the white area around my stamped image. So you can see I started out with a very, very light hand, and then I'll come in and I'll darken up the area right around my image and fade off the rest of it into the white cardstock. Now I'm using watercolor paper here, so my ink blending actually went on very smooth. And now I'm going to take all that leftover color from my actual feathers on the top of her hair, and I'll just splatter that right on top of my image to add a little bit of color around as well, and a little bit more interest too. I did go ahead and splash on some clean water as well and lift up some of the color just to add some lighter gray dots too. And I did use my heat tool to go ahead and heat set those splatters so I could come in and I could stamp out my sentiment. Now I built up the Sentiment Prayer Warrior. Both of these are included in the stamp set, and I'm actually going to stamp these so it reads like a vertical sentiment. I'm going to go ahead and prep my cardstock with my embossing bag just to cut down on stray powders and to make sure that if any of my little splatters or my watercolor is still wet, my embossing powder isn't going to stick to that. So I was fairly liberal with that embossing bag. I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink to go ahead and stamp this down, and I'm also using my Misty so I can double, or even I think I went triple stamping with this, just to get it nice and dark, and I wanted it really wet so that embossing powder would stick to it very nicely. I'll go ahead and stamp that down. I added my same clear embossing powder that I used before, and then I'll just go ahead and heat set this again. Now on this project, I wasn't too worried about adding a lot of heat to it because I am going to run it through my laminator, so that's going to flatten it out fairly well. And also, it's basically a bookmark. It's going to be in my Bible, which is very heavy, so it's going to flatten itself out over time. Now, I did use distress inks on this. I used them for watercolor. I used them to do some shading around my image. That is going to transfer to my Bible if it gets dewy, if there's any condensation in a room, anything like that. it's going to transfer to the page it's in my Bible, and I do not want that. So I always like to laminate anything like a bookmark or anything like this that's going inside, whether you have, you're using distress inks. Colored pencil can even transfer at times. I always like to laminate my bookmarks and anything like that. So I just cut a sheet of lamination in half. This is an 8.5 by 11, and I ran it through twice. I run it through vertical, and then I turn it horizontally and run it through horizontally so it gets a double pressing. Now I'm using the larger scalloped rectangle die that comes in the same die set as the stitched rectangle that I used for my actual bookmark, and I'm just going to run this through my die cutting machine. There I have a nice shaped Bible marker, so it's not just a regular rectangle, it's got a nice shape to it as well. I just punched a hole in the top of that. I thread a few little scraps of ribbon that I had that matched the watercolor that I used, and then I'm using a piece of twine, tie that right in a knot at the top of where the lamination ends, and then I'll just trim off all the extra ribbons and also the extra twine as well, and that will finish off today's Bible marker. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and as always, I will leave you with a few pictures of the finished project. For more information and the supply list, you can head to my blog. That link will be in the description box below. Thank you guys so much for stopping by and watching today. Happy crafting!